What's up YouTube, Designer14 here, and today we're doing something that we've never done on this YouTube channel before. I am so excited because today I'm going to critique and fix big company logos. Why big company logos? Well, I started to notice that there's a lot of big companies, Fortune 500 companies, that have brands that you've seen everywhere, and they have really weird, little inconsistencies and nuances in their logo. And I'm just kind of left wondering, why a designer who's trained and specializes in brand design would ever make these little minute detail mistakes. So today we're gonna go in and fix some of the best known logos around. Stay tuned, but first, let's roll that intro. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we are looking at 7 logos that are well known but are just really weird. I can't put it any other way. And we're gonna fix some of the really weird things about these logos that have just driven me mad as a designer over the years. Okay, so the first big company logo that we have that is just always boggled my mind is the T-Mobile T. The T-Mobile icon has so many little things that make no sense. The first of which, and this drives me absolutely bonkers, is the fact that the sides of the T aren't straight. They're not vertical, they're actually at an angle. But the problem is that this mark combines a T shape with 2 squares, 2 blocks. And those blocks are very square and geometric, and they match the stem of the T, which is also square and geometric. So if we're gonna have multiple square and geometric shapes, we need to repeat that shape in the rest of the mark. But that doesn't happen. Now, I know that this is probably just the typeface that they're using for T-Mobile, and that's probably how the T is shaped. But in that case, if you're a good brand designer, you'll go ahead and modify the type so that it matches what needs to happen for the mark. Now, for this mark to work effectively, we need to have that straight vertical line that matches the box so that the boxes almost look like they're part of the logo in the T and repeating the same sort of geometric pattern above. That means a 90-degree angle with hard straight lines, not any of these tapered lines. You'll notice they actually did it again on the little serif of the T there, where it's actually diagonal. We've got diagonal lines running in there, and diagonals are fine if that's your brand. But if your brand is built on diagonal lines, you want to use those diagonal lines everywhere so that you can visually communicate the consistency of the brand. T-Mobile doesn't do that. They use squares. The T-Mobile brand is based around squares and a square grid system. If that's the case, we need to square this T off. Make it square, make the line straight, and it'll help bring a more cohesive feel to the branding. So for this T-Mobile logo, this is what we're gonna do to fix it. First of all, we're gonna take these weird side angle lines and we're gonna bring them out so that they're equal with the squares. Now we've created a grid that the eye can follow where we have a left margin, a right margin, and the middle center of the T. Originally, your eye is drawn out away from the boxes, and we want them to be drawn to the mark. So to make this mark feel a little bit tighter and a little bit cleaner, we're gonna go ahead and bump those out, keep those straight. The second thing we're gonna do is trim off that extra bottom of the serif on the T. There's absolutely no reason that this logo should use those diagonal lines. So we're gonna go ahead and flatten that off so that it becomes a parallel line with the boxes that we have in the design. Now we've created a T-Mobile logo that is, quite frankly, just much cleaner. It's the same logo. You can clearly tell that the identity is the same. If we bring these 2 marks up side by side and we look at them, you're gonna be able to tell that my mark actually looks a lot more cohesive than the current mark that they're using. The mark just feels a little bit tighter together, as the geometric shapes and their repetition in the T and the boxes Create a mark that feels like a family. It feels like it belongs together. So this is something to keep in mind when you're designing your own logo marks. If your mark has competing angles, it's not going to look cohesive. Try to use repeating shapes or lines so that everything feels like it belongs together. It doesn't feel like somebody just typed a T and then added some boxes to it, as it does with the T-Mobile logo as it currently is. The second logo that we're going to look at is the Oxford Dictionaries logo. Now, this brand is actually got a lot of problems, and for one, it's almost identical to the Beats logo. This logo probably should have never been created in the first place, but they're still using it, and this is still their brand. And that being said, there is some weird things about this logo. I was looking at this logo, and I thought to myself, wait a minute. No. Oh no, they didn't. Oh, it's not a circle. Oh my goodness. Why? Why is this not a circle? Look at this. It's not an oval. It's like almost a circle. It's just got a little bit on the top and bottom. It's just a little bit egg-shaped. And you're thinking, why wouldn't you make this a perfect circle? What's wrong with you? The logo is supposed to be like an O and a D, right? And here's a really wacky thing. Even the line of the D, the blue doesn't line up to make a circle. If you were to actually follow the trajectory of the blue line coming around, it would completely miss the other portion of blue that on the other side of that connecting line. Why? What is wrong? Like, what is with these inconsistencies? Who made this? When you zoom out, you might think that this logo is a set of circles, but in all actuality, there's not one single circle in this logo. Why? It's just mind-blowing to me why you would not make these perfect circles. Now, with all of that rant being said, I do want to point out that it does occasionally make sense to make a logo that's supposed to look like a circle, not an actual circle. For example, the Google G does this so well. If you look at a Google G in a circle, you'll notice that it's not actually a circle. It's like an egg shape, like an oval. And you're probably thinking, why would Google do that? Well, it's because the crossbar of the G actually creates an optical illusion that makes the horizontal portion of the G look fatter than it is in reality. So if you were to make it a perfect circle, in our human eye, it would actually play a trick on us, and it would make us think that it was actually an oval. So to compensate for this, Google said, we'll just fix it by making it an oval that looks optically in an optical illusion like a perfect circle. So there are times where it makes sense to kind of warp the design to fix an optical illusion, but that is not the case with what's going on in this logo by Oxford Dictionaries. In fact, if anything, because of the white vertical line, your eye would actually be drawn up and down vertically, creating the optical illusion that it might look a little bit taller or egg-shaped. But the weird thing is, they actually leaned into this and made their design even more egg-shaped than the optical illusion appeared to be. So then it makes it even worse of an optical illusion. This is all around a horrible logo mark. So I took it upon myself, I went ahead and fixed it. You can definitely tell when you see them side by side that one of these logos is just not correct. It looks wrong, it looks amateur, it looks warped, like somebody squished it. And mine is perfectly crisp, it's round, it's clean, it's tight, and it looks like a cohesive mark. So how does this apply to you? Well, when you're designing, know that there's optical illusions that can sometimes play into your design work. And if there's not optical illusions, you should always strive to make your marks geometrically sound. What that means is using perfect circles and shapes so that there's none of this wonky, almost circle but not. Anytime you have an almost in your design work, it's not good. If it's almost a square, almost a circle, almost a perfect triangle, it usually doesn't look very visually appealing. So avoid almosts when you're designing logos. Okay, our third logo on the docket today is the Home Depot logo. And everybody knows Home Depot, obviously big chain. They've got the orange box, and it's probably one of the most identifiable orange box logos. If you think of just an orange box without the type, you're probably going to associate it with Home Depot. They've done a great job branding their color. Now, With that said, what they haven't done a good job with is branding their logo type. So the first weird inconsistency in the Home Depot logo is the fact that their "the" isn't aligned with Home and Depot. It's off-center, and it's not centered on their cube. Now, you may never be able to tell that this is aligned properly or not when it's on a large scale and it doesn't have the grid on it. But these little tiny design inconsistencies are what separates okay logos or good logos from great logos. If you're going to be a logo designer, you have to be focused on these details because as the company grows, that logo might grow more than you ever thought possible, and it might end up on stores across the country and be used for decades and decades. Now, these little inconsistencies, they're going to live with that logo forever and ever and ever. So please, if you're lining logos up and designing things, take extra time to make sure things are aligned exactly perfect. Okay, the next thing on this Home Depot logo that's so messed up is the fact that the P, the O, and the T touch. They are actually touching, and no other letter on this logo is touching. Now, this is just poor kerning. I don't know who designed this logo, but in graphic design, when you have a word, you always want to kern your letters, which means spacing them out so that they're all properly spaced. And in this design, he didn't kern properly, because when you kern properly, you don't end up with any weird touching letters like that. It makes them all look kind of jumbled like one shape, and then it reads as D-pot instead of Depot. So go ahead and make sure that when you're designing logo type, especially word marks, you kern your letters properly. It's one of the most important things when designing a word mark. I went ahead and I fixed these two inconsistencies. We aligned the T and we space out those letters properly. And when we do that, we find that the logo looks much more aesthetic. You can see, if you look side by side, that the kerning on the Depot is probably the most distracting thing. You don't really notice the fact that the is off-centered on Home and Depot, but trust me, it's there, and it's there in their official brand. But the Depot, the kerning on the Depot, I cannot get over. So Home Depot, please fix your kerning. Make those letters spaced properly so that there's not a jumbo where they kind of mush together in a big bleh. Okay, we're moving on to our fourth logo that has a little bit of weirdness in it, and that is the Fox logo. Now, Fox is a massive company, so this one is mind-boggling to me. So I downloaded this logo and I started looking at it, and I realized a couple of things very quickly. First off, you might notice the F, and you say, it's at a different angle than everything else. And we've just talked about angles in the T-Mobile logo. Now, that's probably just the typeface, and so if you're the designer of the Fox logo and that's the typeface or it was a creative choice, I could maybe get behind that. So that's not actually where I have the most issues with this logo. However, in my version, I did fix it because I think it looks a little better with the straight lines, because I think it makes it look a little more consistent. And again, consistency is key with logos. But where I actually have the biggest qualms with this logo is in some of the spacing on these letters. Notice that when we drag some guides, that the X and the O don't line up. The O is actually smaller than the rest of the type. Now, if you know anything about typography rules and optical illusions, it's actually best practice to make letters like O and G go above the title case line by just a little bit. Because if they sit at the title case line, it actually makes them look disproportionately small to the rest of the capital letters. So you tend to want to have those curves actually break the bound of the capital line. But in this case, not only did they not have it touch the capital line, they actually made the O smaller than the capital line. That is takes bad practice and makes it worse. This is like a big no-no, because now that I've pointed it out to you, you can notice if we zoom out that the O definitely appears visually smaller than the F and the X. We don't want that if we're trying to create a word mark. We want it to be able to look as if it were all one mark. In addition to that, I have the biggest problem with this in the fact that the F and the X aren't the same size. Who did this? Who does this when they're designing a word mark. Can you not make your letters the same height? Look at this guide that we drop on the bottom of the X. It doesn't line up with the F. And all this takes is taking the anchor points on the bottom of the F and dropping them down to be equal to the X. That's all it takes. It's a very simple 2-second fix in Adobe Illustrator that makes everything line up. And you're not gonna ever notice the 2 pixels that it's off when it's looking on the screen or printed on something. But as a designer, again, these are the little details that make good designs great. The last problem that I have with this mark is that the X is broken unevenly. What I mean by that is that the X has different angles for the top arms and the bottom legs. That creates more space in between the O and the X on the top than on the bottom. And that's a really weird visual thing for me that I just can't get over. I get that this is probably the typeface and the person who designed this just used whatever typeface they used. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, and they typed it out, and that's how the X was in the typeface. But you can very easily fix this by taking the X and evening out those arms and legs. So if we go ahead and take a look at these changes that I made side by side with the regular Fox logo, I fixed the O so that you can see that my O in the word Fox appears to be the same height as the F and the X. It doesn't seem smaller like it does on their logo. Another thing that I fixed was the spacing between the X and the O. It's even now, and I went ahead and fixed the F both on the top and on the bottom by evening it out. Overall, I think my mark just has a little bit cleaner and tighter feel, especially when you zoom out at a far distance, which is very important to a logo mark. These logos might be super small, so you always want to make sure that at small sizes they look good. I feel like mine just has better visual spacing than the original Fox logo. Okay, moving on to our next one. The next logo on the docket today is eBay's logo. eBay. What are you guys doing? This one has so many weird things going on. I just don't understand this. They've created a logo where all of the letters are touching. Now, the previous eBay logo was all overlapping. Now they decided they want a more modern mark, so they typed out eBay, but all of the letters are touching. And I really think that this hurts the logo for a couple of reasons. First of all, touching letters is just never quite considered best practice because it always ends up providing really weird little shapes in the mark, such as in between the B and the A here, where we get a little gap of space and then this weird kind of like closed in white space or closed in shape. Also, if you notice when we zoom in, there's little weird things like this awkward space at the bottom of the E because it's touching, but there isn't a smooth way for a curved E and a straight B to touch. So we end up with this little white sliver of space in between the two. And that just provides really weird shapes and really weird things going on. Also, another thing that I noticed is the designer couldn't quite get the Y to be perfect, so there's actually a gap of white space in between the A and the Y on this mark. I'm never a fan of touching typography. I think that if you're gonna make your letters touch, you either need to go all the way and commit to just having them overlap, or you need to space them out and give them room to breathe. Having them exactly touch kind of just makes the design look messy. So the really easy way to fix this logo is simply kern the letters. Give them the proper space they need to sit on their own, and you don't actually need them to touch. Notice the side by side, my eBay word mark just looks a little more professional because it looks like an actual word instead of looking like a gobbledygook of different shapes that are all kind of touching together. So if I were you, eBay, I would go ahead and just space your letters out, give them a little bit more visual room to breathe, and make them look like a word instead of trying to kind of halfway commit to a word and overlapping text and trying to harken back to your old brand. Just get rid of the overlapping, go with the regular word mark, and you'll be set. If you guys are interested in how I kern my logos and learning the perfect method to getting a great logo mark every single time, let me know in the comments and I'll make a video about how to properly kern a logo mark. Okay, with all that said, let's move on to our next design. The next logo that just frustrates me so much is the Lowe's logo. Lowe's, can I just talk to you for a minute? Overall, your logo is better than Home Depot. So I give you kudos for beating your competition. The blue house is pretty iconic, and there's nothing really wrong with your word mark, so to say. Except for the fact that I don't like big capitals and small capitals. I would probably just chop that top of the L off and make it level with the rest of the word mark, but that's personal preference, and some designers prefer that. So it's not bad. But who squashed your S? Like, who did this? Your S looks warped. It looks squishy. Why does it look cramped? It's almost like somebody couldn't quite fit things together, so they just kind of like squished the S. Why would you do this? It doesn't look like an S, and it doesn't look like it matches the rest of the logo type. So I went ahead and I corrected the mistake. I fixed the S by just completely scrapping what they had and making my own. So this is my own version of the S, and there would be a lot of ways to fix this, and you could make different types and styles of S's, and I get that it was probably just the font and the designer didn't take the time to fix the letters in the font that didn't look quite right. But if you're going to be a great logo designer, you need to take into account these small details and things that don't look right, and if you can fix them, make sure you do so. It's more important that you modify a font and fix it to make it look good for the logo than just leaving the typeface as it is. When we look at the two side by side, the squishy S definitely stands out as a glaring inconsistency in the mark. I fixed this S by recreating it, and I believe it has a much more appealing look and style. It doesn't look so squashed, so warped. It now kind of has a full body, and it looks like it belongs, as if it's part of the word mark instead of an afterthought. Lastly, I really quickly just want to show you the mark with the big capital, little capitals, and without. Now personally, I think that having all of these letters the same size makes the logo feel a little bit more modern. I'm not a big fan of having big capitals and small capitals, like I said earlier, but that's a stylistic preference. So if the designer wanted to argue with me on that one, I would probably concede to whoever designed the logo mark, but I just wanted to show you the difference between having all the letters the same size and using a big capital, small capital mix. We are at the final logo critique of the day, and I know it's been a long one, and thanks for hanging in there, but we have got to look at this logo if we're going to talk about famous logos that are just not good, and that is the PayPal logo. Here we have the PayPal logo, and PayPal is a massive commerce giant, but this logo mark has a few things that really just kind of rub me the wrong way. Now first off, we have an italicized font. Now I'm generally not a fan of italicized fonts for logo word marks, but in this case, if that's what they really want, I'll give them a pass to use the italicized font. But in general, if you're a logo designer, I would suggest avoiding them. Now aside from the italicized font, we've actually modified this typeface by rounding the corners, and that gives the logo a little bit more of a soft feel. That's okay, except for the fact that I feel like some of these rounded corners produce really weird shapes. For example, look at this A. There's something about when you round this A out, you can tell that the A used to be a straight hard edge, and now the rounding kind of makes it look a little warped. It makes some of these lines not seem so sharp and crisp, and it kind of loses its geometric feel. Another example would be on the back of this A here, where it looks like the right hand side actually has more curvature than the left hand side, and what that shows is that this just wasn't done with a lot of attention to detail. The logo mark was made quickly, or they didn't take the time to properly round each corner of every letter to make it look consistent. Now moving on to the actual icon mark of PayPal, again, I think the curved edges on this logo actually hurt more than they help, because look at the weird little white space that's created between the curves at the bottom of the P's. If you zoom in with curved lines like this, there's a lot of weird little spacing things, details that should be picked up and fixed by a graphic designer, but for whatever reason in this mark, they just weren't. So I decided, hey, let's take it upon ourselves to fix the PayPal logo. Let me help you out, PayPal, make your logo look better. So the first thing I did is I went ahead and I straightened out all of the edges on the typography. I made all of the italicized type straight edged instead of having those rounded corners. And as you can see, this looks a lot more corporate and it looks a lot more professional than the rounded corners on the first PayPal logo. In addition, I fixed the logo by making all of the lines straight, so now we don't have any weird spacing inconsistencies. And overall, this helps just clean the logo up and make it look a little bit better. Now, if you haven't watched my video on how not to design a logo, you should definitely check that out. It's going to be linked right there because I go over all of the things that you should not do while designing a logo. The PayPal logo actually does one of them, and that's overlapping colors. There's no good way to make this icon a one color design because it's contingent on having those 3 colors to give it that overlapping effect. Making this logo one color is just going to completely destroy it. So this is not a good mark on a couple of different reasons, but just to fix what they have currently and kind of showcase how it could be made a little bit better. If we look at them side by side, we'll be able to tell that my mark looks a little more crisp. Again, it's a tighter mark, it's more clean, it's more professional, it pulls everything together better than the rounded corners on the italicized type that they have currently. Having that modified typography like that is really just hurting their brand, and it makes their brand feel amateur and makes it feel incomplete, as if somebody didn't really take the time to properly do it. So having a much crisper look, I think, would help PayPal in the long run, even if their icon is not that good. Thank you so much for joining me on this logo critique session of major company logos. If you enjoyed this content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments, like, what was the worst design atrocity that you saw today, or what was your favorite fix? Maybe if there's a logo that you've noticed out there in the world that has some of these weird inconsistencies and you've always wondered, why do they do that like that? Tell me what it is. I would love to know because I want to go take a look also. If you want to see more videos where I'm critiquing and fixing big company logos, drop me a like so that I know that this video is something you want to see again. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm going to see you in our next video.